Hi, everyone, and welcome to Black in Focus. I'm Karen Toulon at the Bloomberg headquarters here in New York, and I am thrilled today to be joined by Carlos Watson. He is the CEO and founder of OZY Media. Carlos, good to see you in California, I guess.
Yeah, Karen, good to be with you. Good morning and happy July, I guess.
Happy July to you. Well, I did an internet search of your name, Carlos, and when I did that, the word entrepreneur comes up. There's a list of all of your endeavors, high-powered academic institutions like Harvard and Stanford Law. Then we have your career in consulting at McKinsey. Then we have you are a commentator, host at CNN and at MSNBC. You founded a college consulting company and then sold that. And then striking out at OZY Media in 2013. And you're in the third season of the Carlos Watson Show. You reach around 100 million people a month. And then, of course, OZY Fest, which you launched about 4 years ago in New York Central Park, held in the summer. This past summer was virtual because of COVID. That's a lot. Now, you've made it your business to get into the business of other people, right? And so you talk to a lot of people, from Barack Obama, Pose actress Dominique Jackson, Paralympian Amy Purdy, Condoleezza Rice, Swiss Beats. I mean, people who've just spent their lives just really defining and redefining success. And so today we're going to be talking with you about how is it you manage a career? How do you become successful? The whole notion of taking risks, which a lot of people like to say, be risky, be bold, whatever that means. And then the notion of rewards, especially in these times. How does that sound?
I love it. It's funny when you said you'd Google the name, my name, the first thing that came in mind was growing up, I got into a lot of trouble, Karen. I had the rare distinction of getting kicked out of kindergarten, or as I like to say, I was asked to consider other options.
Well, we're gonna talk about your being asked to consider other options at the ripe age of 5. But I think we're both of an age that perhaps after we survived kindergarten, we were told you need to come up with a plan, right? And so you want to have these like 5-year career plans. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. Even in a career in journalism, there still was a sense you should have some sort of a plan. As we've kind of tried to battle back from COVID, especially in these times, are things so disrupted for people, and even in traditional careers, are things so disrupted that the notion of a traditional career path is just out the window? What do you think about that?
I feel like probably for more than half of us here in the U.S., certainly in white collar and in blue collar industries, it is. Very few things, I think, have that level of permanence. Everything's changing, schooling's changing, currency is changing, move to Bitcoin. By the end of the decade, I think the most significant thing will be not the presence of these phones, but actually will be the presence of robots and clones. And so I do think in that kind of world, we are unlikely to have careers in the same industry for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We're unlikely to be at the same company for that period of time. We're certainly unlikely to be in the same place, Karen, right? I mean, all this work from home or digital nomads. So I think a lot of change is upon us. Some of that will be scary. Some of it I think will be incredibly exciting and will be liberating. And you'll see people discover kind of new friends and new skills and figure out different ways to, you said at the very beginning, to take chances and to think about and assess risk.
And so, I was watching your interview with her, the performer, and I was struck by the fact that even at a very young age, she said that she felt that people were listening with their eyes instead of their ears. And so she very intentionally and purposefully named herself, her performing self, her, and that her first, or one of her first images, public images, was a silhouette, because she wanted that notion of her performing self to be not that strong identity of a visual self, but something more amorphous. That's a long way of saying do we need to be more intentional about thinking about the type of career that we want, or the types of skills that we want to put forward, and less about this precise job, this precise activity at this precise time?
I think we do have to have that fluidity, because Karen, it's crazy. Last night, couldn't sleep for some reason. I was surfing the web and saw that Apple had soared to an all-time record, $2.5 trillion valuation. And who in the world would have imagined, when Apple was nearly out of business? You and I remember, it wasn't that long ago, Apple was nearly out of business, and Steve Jobs essentially had to get a bridge loan from Bill Gates to stay in business. And who would have imagined that they would have grown in this way, or even continue to grow even after he passed, right? That Tim Cook. And so I think that we have to stay open and humble and ready to understand what could be, and how it could come together. And what's so interesting to me, Karen, is that the era that we're living in isn't an era where it's only about our job. In so many cases, it may be about other entrepreneurial things we do. Are we an Airbnb host? Do we ride, do we drive Uber or Lyft at night? How do we think about day trading? Are we day traders? And is that a part of it? And so I think that there's a much more interesting calculus that can determine what's true for your daughters, or what may be true for my nephew, or what may end up being true for us as two people who probably hope to live into triple digits. That there's so much opportunity and so much need to be nimble and to change, because things are changing around us, whether we like it or not.
But with that, I hear, maybe it's just me, but I hear opportunity and I hear nimble, and all I hear is, I see a visual of a high tension wire, and then I see a visual of me falling off it, right? And so I'm talking about risk here. How do you navigate that risk? All those people that you've spoken to, or even in your own career, how do you weigh that risk?
I think probably a couple things are true, and I don't know that I would have. I heard this when I was younger. I don't know if I believed it. I think an important early framing question is, what do you love? What gets you excited? What's lights your heart up? Now, I used to hear that and think, yeah, that sounds like something that rich people get to do. You just get to talk about what you would love to do and then go off and do it. And anyone who knows my dad knows that was not what he was signing up for. He was not excited about me going to find myself or going to just do whatever I want. He, like a lot of folks who was very focused on, I want you to be solid. I want you to be stable. But I do think that there is more opportunity to be creative and pursue your dreams. I talked to a friend of mine, Mark Mader at Smartsheet. He's the CEO of Smartsheet, and he talks about this no-code world that we're living in which, once upon a time, in order to do big radical things, you probably had to have even more technical skill. But because there's so many cool tools these days, project management software, or the ability to buy and sell things online, etc., that you can take more risk, Karen, without being as risky as you once were. And so, do I think that people need to plan? 100%. Do I think that people need to assess whether or not only will I enjoy it, but what's my chance of success? 100%. Do I think that there will be failure in it? Yep, I think there will be failure in it. But do I think that you could probably take 5 times the amount of risk, Karen, that my parents took, and that your kids and one day maybe my kids will be able to take, probably 25 times the risk that we could take, and probably get roughly the same reward? I do. I think that certainly in the white collar, digitally connected world, there's a much better equation for taking risk than there once was. Now, you and I can ask a parallel question: is, should we make sure that risk equation is true for everyone, whether they're in a college educated white collar world or not? And I think, the answer certainly coming out of COVID and even before was that there's some important balancing to be done to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to take more risk and still sees a good part of the reward. But short answer is, I think that there's more risk you can take. And I would hope that most people looking at a set of 4 or 5 options will not only choose the safe one, but will increasingly say, over a span of 5 years, I probably can take 3 good shots And at least one out of my 3 shots should be something that normally would be called risky. That would be called, if this was college admissions, Karen, it'd be called a stretch school. You got to have at least one stretch school among the 3 shots that you're taking in a 5-year period. Whereas when you and I were younger, someone reasonably would say, you don't get to that until you're 20 years into your career, and then maybe you could start thinking about taking some risk.
And while you're doing that, what are the basics that you need to make sure that you have? You need to make sure you can pay your rent. Are you making sure you have your 401k, that if you have kids or younger people that you're responsible for, that you have higher education locked up for them? Are those things that are non-negotiable?
I wish I could say I thought that these things were non-negotiable, and certainly growing up with my parents, the son of 2 teachers, I felt like things like college were non-negotiable. But I'm humble enough to know that Jay-Z was born the same year I was born. You know what I mean? And things worked out pretty well for him. And obviously, I'm talking to you over a device that Steve Jobs, who never completed college, helped create. And while I realize that a lot of people could look up and say those are 2 wild outliers and aren't the right examples to use, I do think that we have a more flexible world and a more flexible economy. And from stock trading to so-called side hustles in the sharing economy like Uber, there's more opportunity. But what do I think are some of the non-negotiables? I think health is certainly critical. I think having some sort of plan, and I think the plan's important not because you're going to stick to those 6 things or 8 things or however many it is, but because it means that you actually took some time to think through what you would love to be true. And you took some time to not only think what I'd love to be true, but then to work backwards. How do I get from here to there? And that you've kind of plotted it out and stress tested it a little bit. The last thing, though, that I think has got to be non-negotiable in this moment is that you've got to have more than one thing that you're counting on. I think it would be a mistake for any of us not to take a portfolio approach to our life's ambitions. And by life's ambitions, I don't just mean finance, financial health, and career, but I mean literally your physical and mental health. I mean your happiness, that there's got to be more of a portfolio approach to that.
Interesting. And so, that gets me to something I've been thinking about, the whole notion of success. And again, old school was that you were going to make it one day, right? You worked really hard your entire life and then you'd make it. And making it was the sort of final destination. And you would get whatever that meant at the end, whether it was the big job and the big house and the ability to do certain things at the end. It was like this big end game. Perhaps really successful people know when it's right to start cashing in some of their success early on and start reaping some of those benefits. And maybe that's the risk equation, right? And so how do you know when that timing is to say, I've reached this certain point? When I was listening to your interview with Swiss Beats, and he was profoundly successful and then said, I'm in meetings and I wish I understood more about the business world. And then he goes off to Harvard Business School, right? And then comes out of it not only better able to manage his own affairs, but he says he's more effective in some of the other activities that he's doing, some of the philanthropic things that he's doing. And so the unintended consequences of that action. And sometimes you think unintended consequences are always negative, and sometimes they're positive. And perhaps for successful people, they're more likely to be positive. So how do you know when along the success journey to say, I've reached a certain point, let me start reaping some of those benefits and reinvest back in myself?
Yeah.
How does that work?
I love that question. And I think that is such a good question. It's funny. I was talking to a friend about a variation of that. And she was talking about, she was in her early 50s, she's in her late 40s. And she was saying to herself, am I smart to be thinking about retirement as something that you do at 70 or 80? Or would I be smarter to actually think about, quote unquote, retiring, or maybe retiring for the first time earlier, at a time in which I'm healthy enough to travel, actually enjoy that travel, do adventurous things, have joy. And so she really was thinking, in my mind, really kind of freshly about it. And so I think you're right that there's probably something, if I had to, there's Moore's law out here back in the day in and around technology. And maybe I'm going to coin Watson's law or Toulon's law and say that, there's probably a need every decade for you to think about a meaningful risk, or what once upon a time would have been called a risk. And my guess is with each passing decade, that 10-year increment will decrease by 25%, meaning that it'll be 7.5, and then it will be, roughly 5 3/4, and then it'll be, it'll be even a shorter increment. But that I think 10 years probably feels about right, that every 10 years you should be thinking about some kind of meaningful risk. And again, the risk doesn't necessarily have to be just career. It may be more broadly financial. It may be beginning to invest differently. It may be thinking about side hustles differently. It may be thinking about adopting kids. It may be thinking about, thinking freshly about love and relationships, and taking some chances. Maybe it's a different kind of person than maybe the person you've regularly chosen, or maybe it's even a different approach to your own relationship. So Karen, I love that question. I think that is such a fresh and invigorating question. And if I were to try and humbly put something alongside Moore's law, I would say probably every 10 years for now, and with each passing decade, we may shrink that by 25%.
We just have a couple of minutes. You have a knack for finding successful people, or finding people who are going to be, who other people will later discover. You started the Genius program. Let's see, when was it? Back in 2016.
Yeah.
And in 2017, you gave a Genius grant. There, you select around 10 college-age students. They get around $10,000 and a mentor, most importantly. And back in 2017, you recognized a young Amanda Gorman, who would later speak at Joe Biden's inauguration. What do you see in these young people? Why do you do this award? And what do you see in these college students that other people may not see?
Yeah. Well, I'm the son and grandson of teachers. I'm the great grandson of a runaway slave. And so I think I've always believed that more may be possible than may be easily observable to folks. And I think I've always gotten excited about the idea of transformation. And so when we met a young woman who had a pronounced stutter, but who had lots of dreams about poetry and life and more, we were excited to be one of the early people to support her and back her, and know that with that support, she could do so much more. And I think I've always believed and wanted to be a part of supporting those people long before they were obvious choices to others. And whether it was because you recognize a certain talent, whether you recognize a certain drive, whether you just recognize a decency, whether you and I both know, Karen, that you can't always articulate exactly why you think that there's a little bit of magic, or as my mom used to say, we love people with a twinkle in their eye. And so sometimes there's just a twinkle, but I've always wanted to be in that. And I remember, being a young reporter and anchor at CNN and telling them that I wanted to put this guy Barack Obama on. I was substitute hosting Inside Politics, and I was pitching my producers. It's like, this young guy Obama, I'm telling you, he's magical. They're like, nah, let's hold on. And a couple months later, he wins the nomination. He gives a speech, and they're like, hey guy, you had, and so, at OZY, whether it's been a young Trevor Noah before he was on The Daily Show, or a bartender before she was AOC, or an awkward Black girl before she was Insecure, or, a relatively unknown judge before he was Brett Kavanaugh, we have loved talking to people about folks early on, good, bad, and otherwise, because we think there's real value. We think there's a sense of what else is possible in the world when you meet these up-and-comers.
I know that you've said that the times now kind of remind you a little bit of the 1960s, and we're running really short of time, but and I kind of agree with you. And the one thing that perhaps is interesting will be to see how the whole power structure plays out. But the final question I think for you is, if you could think about in your life, if there was a person or an event, almost like Alice in Wonderland, that little bottle that said "drink me." If there was an elixir that you could kind of bottle that you could give to people, that would just give them that sparkle in the eye that you just talked about, what would that be?
I would give them a little bit of Paulo Coelho, the Brazilian author who wrote many beautiful books, including The Alchemist. And Karen, at the beginning of that book, he says, most of us know what we love. We know what we love. We know what we're excited about. But we spend our lives running away from it, either running away from it because parents have told us to value something else, or society has, or what have you. And he said, what can we do to stay and trust ourselves and get into the line that is right for us? Get out of the line or the lines that other people tell us to stand in, and get in the line that's right for Karen and that's going to energize Karen. And so if I could have a little Paulo Coelho alchemist elixir, pun intended, I'd give you something from The Alchemist, and I would give you that encouragement. And again, you did hear me right. I do think the 2020s will be the new 60s. I think there will be bold reimagining of our society, from how we think about education, how we think about race, how we think about marriage, how we think about work, how we think about technology. And I'm hopeful that there will be more and more innovators, not just the new kids on the block, but even some of the most established players. I look at some of the creative things that places like Walmart that already are big established players, but that in my mind are being way more creative and leaning in ways that I wouldn't expect. If that continues, I think this will be an incredibly dynamic era, and one that I'll be excited to be a part of.
Carlos Watson, thank you so much. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on Black in Focus. That's going to do it for this edition. Next week, we're looking at the world of events and design with Ron Hansford of Ron Hansford Design, and the business behind all of that beauty. But until then, for Black in Focus, I am Karen Toulon. We'll see you next week. Have a good weekend, everyone. This is Bloomberg.